Well, welcome back, folks. And as you can see from that little intro clip, we do have the wiring complete and the 8N is running. In fact, I didn't really have any issues with it. A couple little challenges here and there, but nothing significant. But it did, the important thing is it did start up right away. So the minor issues I bumped into did not prevent the machine from starting. As you can see in this shot right here, the battery box is back in place. I do have a reproduction cover, as you can see there, and the color, of course, doesn't match, and I didn't think it would. The color that I have chosen for my project and as I'm repainting, that was factory painted. I'm pretty sure it's powder coated, and it's a little bit more on the yellow side. And for now, I'm going to leave it alone because it's factory fresh. Eventually, maybe if I get around to it, I might strip that paint off and then match it to, or paint it rather, to match the rest of the red. But for now, it's okay. All the hardware, the attaching hardware, the hold-on hardware is all new. The battery cables are new. We'll go around to the other side in a few minutes and talk about the battery cables and some of those things. But everything's fresh there except for the battery box itself. You can see the label there of the patent label. I think I talked about that maybe once before. Let me zoom in here a little bit for you. That's a reproduction label. It did come with its own new rivets. Those are the spiral type of rivets that you just tap them in, and they're not really threaded. It's like a spiral or a flute. The replacement rivets, it came with the plate, and the plate is very nice. I had no issues with the plate, but the original rivets were too small, actually, for the holes that were pre-drilled in that battery box. I'm guessing they're metric. I didn't measure them, but they're definitely too small, and I could have used them by coming up with some means to secure them, but I didn't. I reused the original rivets, so what you see there are the original rivets restored. I basically media blasted them, soaked them in evaporust, and then attached the plate, and then painted, mask around the rivets, and then painted the rivets red to match the rest of it. So the plate's new, the rivets are original and just been painted. I left the air cleaner canister off just so that you can get a better shot or view of the back side of the battery box here. That will eventually be going back on, of course. I already talked about the voltage regulator a bit, so I'm not going to duplicate that effort. You will notice I left some of the tags on the original wiring just for this video. I will be removing those directly when I'm done here. Those tags were provided by Brillman, the folks I bought the wiring harness from. Brillman sent along this, it's basically a description of where all the wires go, and you can see they're numbered. Bring this up here for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and where the respective connections go. And that's what those labels are. So you just match the labels up there with the numbers here, and that tells you where to put the wires. And it's very simple. I had a wiring diagram anyway, of course, but I used their tags and went right together in no time at all. This was one of the easiest rewiring projects, frankly, I've ever done. And I've done a lot of motorcycles and other things, but this is very simple. The wire right there coming out of the conduit, I wasn't exactly sure where to put that. I looked at a number of different photos that I could find, and it makes the most sense to me that it runs out of the conduit. That's the main wiring that goes up behind the dash here into the voltage regulator, the ignition switch, the resistor on the other side, etc. It makes the most sense to me that would go underneath that lip of the battery box because it's protected from everything. So that's how I routed it. I didn't really find a clear photo that depicted the wiring here as original. I found a lot of variations, over the top of the homemade harnesses, over the top of the box, alongside the battery, down in here, just looped up, etc. But that made the most sense to me. If anyone watching this video has more knowledge about this and could direct me appropriately, I would very much appreciate it. Let's talk about one of the little issues I ran into, and it's pretty minor, but I bumped into it nonetheless. And we've talked about those standoffs before that hold the conduit off the head right there. And what I ran into, because I had to take that conduit off, or I did take it off rather, to fish the wiring through from both ends, and just to make it easier to handle. I had no issues, by the way, fishing the wiring through. I went through with not any issues at all. I didn't even have to lubricate it with silicone grease or anything, which quite often, dielectric grease, quite often I will do. I didn't have to with this, but nonetheless, the issue is when I retorqued that nut right there, it wanted to twist. You can see that standoff, I think. It wanted to twist it like that. It didn't happen the first time I put that nut on, or that bolt in. It did a little bit of a twist on this one, but it twisted that one significantly. And I looked at, as I think I've shared before, I've looked at a lot of photos of this conduit, and that's a pretty common condition I noticed. I thought it might have been original. You know, I've never worked on one of these before, but I think what happens is that does in fact twist like that, just from the torque. It's 65 to 70 foot-pounds of torque on those bolts, and it twisted that standoff, as you can see there. So my intention is to fix that, and I'll straighten it out eventually. So my plan is, and I was given a little tip by one of my viewers, Keith from Manitoba, and he apparently is quite familiar with these tractors. And Keith recommended replacing these two bolts right there with studs. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I've got actually got two of these. Got two studs right here that are actually designed for this. And I'll pull these two bolts out and insert these two studs. The threads are different on each end. One is fine thread and the other is coarse. These are 7/16, by the way. The coarse thread here goes into the block, and then this part here, the longer part, comes up through the head and protrudes up above. You put a nut on to hold that standoff, and then, or to hold the head down rather. You torque that, and then a nut on top of that with the standoff, so that you can take that conduit on and off without having to pull, the bolts out of the head. So I'm going to replace those two bolts right there and straighten that little twist out. I'll probably have to touch it up, of course, when I'm done the paint. I'll do that when I flush the cooling system, because those bolts go into the water jacket. So I have to drain down the radiator and block to pull those bolts. So when later on this spring or summer, whenever I get around to flushing the cooling system, probably replacing the radiator, etc., at that point, since I have the coolant drained anyway, I'll pull these two bolts and replace them with these studs, and then I'll have double nuts here and here, and I'll straighten those standoffs. So that was one little issue I ran into. Not major, of course, but does require fixing. At least I'm going to fix it. Allow me to reposition the camera here a bit, and there's a couple other things I want to talk about. I'm in handheld mode now, so you're just going to have to bear with me. I don't care to do handheld much, but I couldn't give you a shot here, I don't think, if I didn't hold the camera manually. But anyway, there's two brackets that were missing, and I think I referenced this once before, that I noticed were not there, that were supposed to be. I saw remnants of it underneath one of the bolts, but they were gone. The two brackets were gone. One is right here. That is a reproduction part, and that is designed to keep these spark plug wires away from the, let's see if I can give you a better shot of that, right there, of the fan belt right here. And they just protect the wires or hold them out of the way. That bracket was missing, so I bought that one. And then down in here, right, I don't know if I can point to it, right there, that red bar, that's the adjusting bracket that allows you to tilt the generator out, move it in and out to put tension on the belt itself, the fan belt. That was completely missing. And the previous operator or owner was simply using the pivot. There's a pivot in here that this whole unit pivots on. That's really to hold it in place. They were just using the pivot as a tensioner for the drive belt. And it was gone. The piece, the little bracket was missing. So I went online and found what I think was a photo of the original. They're no longer available new. Well, from Ford, they're not available. You can buy them reproduction, but what I did is I just made my own. So that's a homemade bracket, repainted, of course, or painted. And I'll put up here a photo of the original that I used as a model or template, and a better photo, a better shot of what my finished homemade version looks like. So I'll put that up here for you to take a look at. Over on the left side of the tractor, just a couple things I wanted to point out for you is that I'm replacing all the rubber boots right here. I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to see. It might be behind the solenoid. But there's supposed to be a rubber boot here and a rubber boot here, which I have ordered. I do not have that yet. You can get those reproduction. This one, the one I'm waiting for, though almost every supplier of 8-in parts shows them being available, they don't have them right now. So I had to look around to find a supplier that actually had inventory. And I ordered it a few days ago. I just don't have it yet. So that will go on here. But again, I got this one replaced. And let me reposition the camera. I replaced the boot here. That the wire lead that goes up to the starter has been replaced, the boot. And then there's a grommet that you can't quite see. It's very hard to see, that fits in the very bottom here. I think you might be able to just see the edge of it. It's a black rubber grommet that goes in the bottom of the dash that the wire that goes to that starter switch fishes through. The only issue I had there, and this is one of the other issues I had, is that the spade terminal that fits onto, that mounts the wiring over underneath the screw on the starter switch, wouldn't go through the grommet on the bottom of that I installed here on the bottom of the dash. The hole in the grommet was just big enough to fish this wire through right here. So what I ended up doing is just clipping off that original spade terminal, and I've got all kinds of those supplies. So I just clipped that off, pulled a wire through the grommet, and then just soldered on a new spade terminal and then applied heat shrink. You can just see the heat shrink right there, the black heat shrink. And the original had heat shrink also, so 5-minute job and got that fixed. Ground strap right here. Remember, this is a 6-volt positive ground, but the ground strap, and I think that's the right place, everything I could determine to mount the ground strap to, and it goes up to the positive terminal of the battery. Let me open this up for you and let you see what's going on in there. It's hinged, which is a nice feature. You can see the ground strap. Again, that's the positive terminal. This is the negative terminal, and of course it just goes down to the starter solenoid, and we're again waiting for that boot. But that's a nice feature, that hinged cover. New hardware, of course, as I mentioned before, everything is pretty much new. In here, you can see how that's twisted. When I torqued this bolt, they both twisted just a little bit, but this one worse than the other. New key switch. Of course, everything back here is new. All the wiring's new. But this is a new key switch. And I mounted it. It was a little bit of an unusual configuration. I won't go into the details because it probably is not very understandable how I would explain it. But it was a little bit different mounting system than what I was used to in terms of the key. But I think it's original style. Everything I've researched tells me it is. And 2 keys. Normally I pull the keys out of it when I'm not working on the tractor. Now at this point, I have not done any testing of the electrical system, that is the output of the generator. I don't think the amp meter is working, which is right there. I don't think it's not registering anything, and that could be because the meter itself isn't any good after 75 years. The generator might not be producing current or output. I don't know yet, but eventually I'll get into it. Again, it's not a major concern of mine at this stage. Eventually I'll get around to that, but at this point I want to get the wiring done, make sure the tractor runs, which clearly it does, before we move on to the next major work that we're going to undertake. I consider the wiring pretty much complete at this stage, outside of the things I just talked about with doing some testing. And of course, I might find some things that I might want to tweak and tune in terms of wire routing. After all, a project like this is never truly done. And if I find I want to reroute something or make a few changes with the wiring, I will as I go along. But at this point, I'm happy with where I'm at. So let's talk about the next major project for this tractor. Now, the wiring's pretty well wrapped up for all practical purposes at this point. The next step is going to be rebuilding the carburetor right there. And I'm going to do a complete rebuild, a cleaning, painting, everything you can think of to restore that carburetor back to as close to original as I can make it. That'll probably be a multi-part series, and undoubtedly it'll be a multi-part video series, probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 videos. I'm real particular about my carburetors and the process that I use, and I'll take you through that. I'm not going to show you me rebuilding the carburetor, but I will talk you through my theory of rebuilding carburetors that I've used for 50 years or more, actually now, that I've developed primarily for motorcycles and small engines, but it'll apply certainly to this machine as well. So that'll be coming up in the next number of videos in this saga of getting this little 8N back in good operating condition for summer mowing. So that's going to be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching. I thought we'd take a look at the old wiring harness, and this is it in its entirety. This is the whole shebang. This yellow wire, of course, is a wire that went to the points. And the switch, this was the ignition switch on-off, which obviously is not anywhere near original. In fact, they had it mounted upside down in the dash. It's just a hardware store toggle switch. This is the resistor I was talking about right here, and actually this did test okay, but I replaced it anyway, obviously, as you saw. This switch was in a dash, and I think it was probably originally used to control the lights, because there was a light on mounted on the rear of the seat that pointed backwards, probably for nighttime plowing or snow removal or something, but doesn't work anymore. I mean, you can't, this is one that I think, you're supposed to be able to turn this stem here, and it long since is frozen up. But that really wasn't doing anything either. And then the rest of this is, in its entirety, the rest of the harness. And I think most of this is original. There are some places where it's been patched, as you can see, I think right there. And it's been hacked, and pieces have been cut out. There's a wire here somewhere, I don't remember where it is right now, that actually had been clipped somewhere in here. Anyway, I think most of this is original. You can see the fabric covering right there that, I don't know if that's cotton or what it is, but that's the original main wiring harness. And of course here we have the spark plug leads. Clearly these are aftermarket. In fact, they are labeled Motorcraft, which is a Ford trademark. Right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. They're Motorcraft aftermarket. Aftermarket meaning they're not original to the equipment, but they are Ford or Motorcraft. Missing one of the spark plug boots. I don't know, it's around here somewhere. I just clipped the boots off, as you can see, because I wasn't intending to keep this for any reason. I wanted to get it out of that conduit, so the easiest way was just to clip it and pull them out, and you can see what they look like there. So very simple, one of the simplest wiring harnesses you'll probably ever see in a machine like this, and far less complicated than most of the motorcycles I've dealt with over the years, which are much more involved, much more intricate, and much harder to work with. This was nothing comparatively speaking, but that's what the original looked like.